I had no prior belief in the preternatural, paranormal, or mythical. I was very much the atheist and a practical man, but the events of that night changed me for the worse. I'm hoping that someone might know what I'm dealing with, and whether I should stay looking over my shoulder. I had been introduced to Christopher about a month prior. He already had a soured reputation before reaching the school grounds, thanks to news outlets covering his story. Easton was known as the go-to place to drop off developmentally disabled students that parents weren't apt to handle. A horrible reputation to have, I know, but we were good at what we did. A full-fledged boarding school with a massive campus, we housed about 500 youth aged 9 to 22. Most students moved to group homes once they aged out, so we focused on functional skills rather than academic ones. I worked the second shift at B Wing as a supervisor, which housed the most behavioral students. It was a 10-story building, equipped with state-of-the-art dorms, classrooms, gyms, kitchens, indoor pool, everything the students needed to minimize their need to leave the building. We even had a mini grocery store inside. I was against keeping the students cooped up with no public interaction, but that's a different story. Christopher was scheduled to join B Wing, much to everyone's disdain. He had made the news for stabbing his mother over 20 times during a schizophrenic episode. It wasn't the act that made him a news phenomenon, though, but rather his backstory. To lend perspective, most of the children we housed were born with their diagnosis: autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, Down syndrome, etc. Either that or acquired brain injury. They normally received intensive therapeutic services starting at age 2, through high school and beyond. Christopher, however, did not fit the picture. He was very much born a normal child. He was socially developed and intelligent, a B-average student at school. He had friends, crushes, teenage worries, and even a newspaper delivery job. One day, though, right around his 13th birthday, something ticked in Christopher. The parents described it as a literal night and day difference. He woke up and was no longer the son they once knew. Overnight, Christopher suffered a mental breakdown of sorts and developed full-blown schizophrenia. This was accompanied by auditory hallucinations, more commonly known as voices. The parents described a chaotic scene that morning filled with violence, rampage, and blood-curdling screams. The mother was stabbed, and the father had to restrain the boy, nearly killing his son. Eventually, Christopher was sectioned into a hospital where he received his diagnosis. The doctors were stunned by the sudden onset of mental afflictions, given his normative background. They were able to identify 3 different voices that afflicted Christopher, all of whom encouraged him to do unspeakable things. Each voice had a specific name, one of which was the foulest of the 3 and the rarest to occur. The local news dubbed him the boy who broke down. People speculated how such a breakdown could occur in the first place. Many blamed the parents, others accused the father of sexual abuse. Police interrogations cleared the parents of wrongdoing, but there was always a tinge of uncertainty looming over them. Either way, the Christopher Tavern once there had ceased to live, replaced by a scared, mentally fissured boy. Many of the staff protested his onboarding, citing that he needed a more restrictive environment. Although we've had our fair share of violent kiddos, Christopher's story posed a dramatic allure that intimidated us. After extensive therapy and years' worth of experimental drugs, the doctors found the perfect mix of medications to quell the voices burdening Christopher. Though the voices would never fully go away, they could at least suppress the foulest of the 3, Topaz. The other 2 were manageable, but Topaz had been the one to encourage his mother's stabbing that morning. Each time Topaz emerged, Christopher made an attempt at someone's life. Since the inception of his current medication mix, though, Topaz hasn't emerged for well over 2 years. The boy was eventually deemed qualified for community reintegration. At the age of 20, Christopher was set to board our school. I vividly recall my first time meeting him. He was tall, very tall, about 6'6", and lanky. His skin reminded me of a bruised peach. It was mottled and blotched with an unsettling rubber band appearance to it. His eyes usually avoided yours, but when he did make eye contact, it was a piercing gaze. His personality also fluctuated, making me wonder if he had dissociative identity disorder on top of it all. He was either mute, quiet, and meek, or mischievous, childlike, and cunning. The boy I first met was the former. He answered with single-word responses. Yes, no, ooh. You can imagine my shock when I met the mischievous side a week later. That side spoke in full sentences, was articulate, caused trouble, picked fights, and antagonized other residents and staff alike. We were not thrilled with his addition to the wing. About 20 days into his move-in, the incident occurred. I was working with a good crew that night. There was about an hour left of shift, and we were finishing up daily logs. Most of the kids were sleeping, but Christopher was up and about, teasing another one of the boys. I had left the office to chastise him in the lobby, which looked more like a giant living room. Bal was already there, trying to pry the two apart. Though small, she was mighty. Whereas most female staff would be afraid to be alone with him, she wasn't afraid to grab the bull by its horns. She would later admit in privacy that she was terrified, but she'd never let that show in the moment. It's 'cause he's a little bitch. Fuck you, Kreese. You have own games. You lost 2. You no take mine. Kyle was a good kid. A bit of trouble on his own, but always pure-spirited. Being about 5 feet tall with Down syndrome, Christopher towered over him. You suck at games anyway. Give them to me. He shoved his shoulder and held his hand out, demanding the Nintendo. Bal intervened. Christopher, enough. It's 10:15 and the others are sleeping. Tone it down and go to bed. I will not. He flashed a wry grin that modeled his intentions. Yes, you will, I interjected. He spun around and our eyes met. This is the 3rd time I've had to address you. You're a grown man at this point. Make a grown decision. A devious grin shifted the corners of his mouth again. Sorry. He held his hands up in mock defense. Kyle owes me some games, that's all. I do not. You'll have 0 games in a moment, Bal responded, and it'll stay like that for the week. Christopher spun back around, his arms following him like loose Twizzlers. Shut up, cunt. His tongue was sharp. I was about to cut in when Bal stepped into his space, challenging him. Or else what? The two exchanged glares, making for a tense moment. Chris eventually conceded with a wave of the hand, sucking his teeth while setting his crosshairs back at Kyle. Baby needs mommy to protect him again. I thought we were grown men. He backed away and fell like a tree on the couch, pretending to watch TV while he fickled with his fingers. Bal and I exchanged glances. I pointed to my radio, to which she gave a nod and sighed before attending to Kyle, who still wanted to go at him.